When she first brought home the iron skillet, no one questioned her sudden culinary skills, except maybe for her mother. Honestly, Katrina, I don't understand what's gotten into you. I've never seen you express one whit of interest in food. It was also her mother who commented on her weight. Honestly, Katrina, with these fancy meals you effortlessly whip up, I don't know how you stay so skinny. Do I need to worry about an eating disorder? She patted her stomach. I swear, these extra 5 pounds are all on you. And her mother, who months later lamented honestly, Katrina, you look downright skeletal. It's like your weight is sloughing off on me. Frankly, she paused, lowering her voice, it's like you are plumping us up like chickens. In the meantime, be a dear and warm us up with a little of the bourguignon from last night. Katrina stared down at the overly rouged cheeks. Her mother is still sleeping. This was the third coffin she'd bowed over in as many months. Her eyes are too numb for tears, heart too hollowed out for pain. The doors of the cathedral opened, liberating a breeze that whispered against her cheek. Her mother's voice caressed her. Honestly, Katrina, I think you fed me to death. When her grandmother died, it fell to Katrina to clean out her house so it could be put up for sale. With her part-time job as a waitress and full-time job as an aspiring illustrator, everyone in her family assumed she had the free time to make it happen. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, and the closets under the eaves smelled like cedar and wet leaves. Her back ached from ducking around tight spaces, and her nose ran from the dust and crumbling carcasses of insects. Rubbing her back, she scooted out of the closet and fell on the nearest twin bed. Kat cocked her head as she studied her progress. As the sole worker in this establishment, she determined that anything deemed worthy of selling was her profit to keep. An assortment of arsenal items caught her fancy. Her favorite was a paperback book of photographs of women from the 1960s, fishing topless. A gag for her brother's stocking come Christmas. The sky deepened as she took load after load down the narrow staircase, frequently knocking her knuckles against the walls as she navigated the precarious incline. She forced herself to do one last sweep to make sure she hadn't missed anything. Flashlight in hand, she commenced an inspection of the upstairs attic room. The temperature had dropped, and she shivered. Although she'd never admitted to her siblings, Kate always felt a bit creeped out by the closets with their gaping orifices, open on either side of the twin beds. The two halves of a mouth are about to close and swallow its inhabitants. Without her grandmother's presence, the house felt starved. With a sigh of determination, Kat entered the room, flipping a switch that didn't light. She stomped over to the first closet, shining her beam. Empty. Kat pushed the tapestry of the other closet aside, her mind contemplating takeout options. When she swept the light along the dark, recessed corner, a patch of shadow glimmered. Frowning, she scurried under the flap to take a closer look. She crouched down. The light stuttered off an object she'd missed. Positioning the flashlight to shine into the corner, she crawled to the spot. Reaching out, she touched the cool metal. She wrapped her hands around the outstretched length and tugged. It clanged against the boards as it bounced over to her. The heft, too much for one arm, had her dragging it while she collected her flashlight and fell back onto the carpet of the room. She took a breath, studying the object on her lap. A cast iron skillet. Light from her torch absorbed into the flat black surface and reflected back a kaleidoscope of color. When she turned over the skillet, and property of Cook appeared stamped into the metal. An odd name. She looked forward to looking it up on the internet when she got home. Hungered Nod. Could she cook tonight? Her mouth watered as her mind rifled through various concoctions. Then she laughed, remembering the failed romantic dinner she'd burned for her ex. She cradled the cold metal to her chest. An idea was forming around a simple grill. Cheese. Her belly gurgled, and she hauled her find down the stairs. As she locked up, she planned her list for the store. When she got home, she knocked on Barry's door. He lived a couple of units over. Well, this is a surprise. He grinned. I'm making dinner. You interested? His smile deepened. Kate, I've never known you to cook. Is this an euphemism for something? Kat rolled her eyes. Maybe, if you're lucky. But I'm serious about the food. How can I refuse? He ran a hand down his thick braid. What can I bring to drink? At the deli, she'd picked up a loaf of uncut multigrain bread, blue cheese, and smoked uncurd bacon, beefsteak, tomato, basil, and a sweet onion. She planned on caramelizing in honey and butter. You wouldn't by any chance have a pale ale or IPA, would you? My, you are full of surprises this evening. I'll see what I can do and be right over. Kat became enchanted by the thrill of something new. Elements of spice, herb, and ingredient called to her, much like a mysterious aubergine d'or or a persimmon rose birthing a fairy princess. Rufescent threads of saffron, pearlescent sheets of spring onion, or the transfiguration of gray meat to bronze perfection lured her like a sailor to the sea. She started with easy meals like exotic scrambles, but soon found herself crafting soups and complex sauces. With increasing frequency, her table was full of friends eager to share her creations. Barry was the first to offer up his belly as an official taste tester, but he certainly wasn't the only one. Her mind processed ingredients, diet preferences, and allergies with the efficiency of a calculator, computing algebraic equations. She conspired with 3 different bakers, knew a local butcher by name, and became friends with the owners of her favorite farmers' market stalls. All found their way to her table. Katrina worked in a frenzy, painting, cooking, and hosting. So much so that regardless of how decadent her meals were, weight started to melt off her frame. She found herself digging through her closet for items that hadn't fit in years. One night, as Kat fell into her nest of a bed, in that delicious in-between place before falling asleep, she found herself concocting a muffin recipe. A couple of her co-workers from the restaurant had been over for a meal and bragged her cooking rivaled Damien's, the head chef at their 5-star establishment. Ever since he'd heard the rumors, he'd been harassing her to bring something in. The problem was that her real inspiration revolved around things that could be cooked with a black pan. Yet, as she fell asleep, a breakfast muffin evoking the seasons percolated, dissipating into an endless abyss of night. She floated in darkness without time until sweat bathed her, and she awoke. She stumbled into the kitchen to make coffee and discovered a strange item sitting on top of her stove, a muffin tin. The shade was so dark that it sucked the sunlight from the room. She ran her fingers around the smooth, opalescent surface. Lifting it took 2 hands, and on the bottom she read the same strange imprint, property of compilation. Upon bringing the frying pan home, she did a brief search on her computer, but couldn't trace any company information about the brand name. She'd lost interest. Now, though, somehow she'd inherited a companion piece, probably a gift from Barry. He had a key to her place and the wherewithal in both time and resources to find other pieces from the set. She grinned and threw on her coat and shoes, eager to rush to the store. Her seasons of change muffin wouldn't make itself. When she'd mentioned to Jenna that she was bringing a treat for Damien, she hadn't expected people who weren't on shift to show up. Topiary animals crawled up the walls. Trailing tails of ivy, whose branches intertwined overhead concealed tiny spotlights, illuminating each table while leaving the surrounding space in shadow. The decor was crafted to create the illusion of picnicking in a forest. The intimate space only had room for 30 guests, and it felt like she had an audience. You all aren't here because of me, are you? I certainly didn't bring enough to feed the horde of you. Jenna stepped forward. We can't wait to witness Damien's reaction. We're dying to see what you brought. Damien stood in the open doorway leading to the kitchen, his pristine chef whites, crisp and starched. Am I smelling something for me? He waved her forward. I don't have all day. Kat sat her bag down on a verdant velvet settee and carried her basket over to him. She peeled off the kitchen towel, revealing the still warm muffins. I think it's best if you take a bite, incorporating the top of the muffin to the very bottom. The crown had a slight pink color, enhanced with a speckled blush glaze. The room fell silent as Damien picked one up, inhaling deeply. He opened his mouth wide and took a bite. His eyes closed. Kate laughed. I know, right? What is this? Damien asked after he swallowed. An idea I had before I fell asleep last night. I wanted all 4 seasons in one solitary bite. It starts with summer. A strawberry basil glaze, he asked. Yes, and I used almond flour and paste to make the first half of the base, to illustrate the nutty warmth of fall. And, he continued for her, the traditional bite of sour apple pieces rolled in cinnamon to represent winter in the center, followed by coconut flour infused with rhubarb to symbolize spring. He appraised her. I have to have the recipe. Did you use a particular pan? You have no idea how particular, she thought as she remembered the mysterious delivery left on her couch. Any chance I could borrow it for our Mother's Day brunch? These would be a highlight. Kat flushed with pleasure at the compliment. Sure, but I want my name on the menu. And a table for me and my mom. Done. He moved to go, but turned back to gently pry the basket from her arm before making his escape back into his lair. They sat in a window seat framed in fresh flowers, her mother elegant in pearls and a cream sheath. Kate observed her closely as she bit into the muffin. For a brief moment, her mother's gold-flecked eyes widened. Kat couldn't wait any longer. And? Magical. Her mother licked her lips. It's as if I traveled the globe in one bite. Damien is quite the catch. Have you considered dating him? Damien didn't come up with a recipe. I did. Kat pointed at the menu. Look, I even have a chef credit to prove it. She ground her teeth in an effort to keep a neutral expression on her face. Honestly, Katrina, you're telling me you're a chef now. What happened to illustration? Her mom smiled as she said it, but there was an undercurrent of mirth below her words. Kat willed her eyes not to roll. I'm still an artist. Only my subject matter has metamorphosed. Why am I not surprised? Her mother kept picking at the pastry, tearing bits and eating them. So, what is it now? Portraits of food. You should come over, and I'll show you. Kat wished her mother would join her for a meal and look at her work. Her mother gazed at her candidly. Katrina, should I be concerned about your fixation on food when you look skinnier than I've seen you in quite some time? Are you eating? Obviously, Mom. I couldn't create recipes without tasting them. I think I finally found. I'm glad to hear that. She glanced down at her plate, the muffin gone. I can't believe he ate the whole thing. What has gotten into me? You came up with that. Kat grinned. Yes, and it's all thanks to Grandma's skillet. Her mother's eyes narrowed. Your grandmother wasn't known for her cooking. Huh. Well, maybe it was a family heirloom. It's definitely old. I found it hidden away, in the back of a closet. Her mom's considering stare smoothed into a smirk. When can I be invited over for dinner? Over the months, Kat's inspiration grew. One of her friends made an acquaintance, who worked at an art gallery and insisted on showing her work to his boss. She was going to have her very first art exhibition in a small but well-respected gallery. Damien hoarded the baking pan, always making excuses as to why he couldn't return. He incorporated muffins, cupcakes, and poppers into his daily mix of menu offerings. Her life flowed like a movie. And if she was a little tired each morning from being consumed by carmine ribbons of fire, well, it was the price of an overly imaginative mind. Now her mom was a frequent visitor and often stayed late, helping to clean up. Their relationship grew in the way she always yearned. Everything in her world was perfect until Josie came to town. Banging on her door brought Kat out of a fugue state. She'd been trying to mix the right intensity of indigo for the garlic spear she was painting. I'm coming, she yelled. It sounded like someone had brought a battering ram. Kat wiped paint on her pants before grasping the handle. On the other side stood Josie. They both stared at each other for a full minute before she spoke. Jesus Christ, Kat. Josie, this is unexpected. Her ex traveled for work. Enough that it had impacted their relationship, and after 2 years of dating, they broke it off. Josie reached out and touched her collarbone. Seriously, Kat. It looks like you are going for hair. She tamped down the warmth that trickled from that touch. Kat pulled back. I'm only in town for a few days. May I come in? Kat opened the door wider and gestured for her to enter. Josie stood in the middle of the room, looking at the paintings stacked against the wall. What happened to your furniture? I moved it. I needed the space. I can see that. Josie frowned, her perky nose twitching in a way that made Kat always think of soft, fluffy rabbits. I stopped by the restaurant last night. I'd read about Damien's pastries in the paper. It didn't sound like his style, so naturally I had to see for myself. The crab center with the aioli glaze was enough to make me come. Jenna told me that it was you who got him started. Me, or possibly one of the pans I found when cleaning out my grandma's house. I was sorry to hear she passed. Yeah, me too. Can I offer you something to drink? Once they'd settled at the table, both with infused iced teas of nectarine and fresh mint, Kate chose to speak her mind. So, what brings you by? It hurt to see Josie and know she wasn't hers anymore. After talking to Jenna last night, it seems like a lot has changed. I tried calling, but Kat chuckled. Yeah, I'm constantly misplacing my phone. And I've turned off Thuringer so I'm not interrupted during a creative spell. A key sounded in the lock, and they both jumped. The door opened, and Barry strolled in, arms full of groceries. Kat went to help him. Barry glanced from Kat to Josie. Sorry, I wasn't aware you had company. I didn't want to disturb your work. He tilted his head. Hey, Barry. Josie's tone cooled. I'll leave you to it then. Dinner at 8 tonight. Perfect. Kat could cut the awkward tension in the room with her palette knife. Thanks for shopping for me today. She gave him a peck on the cheek to annoy Josie. He gave the peace sign to Josie before heading out. What is going on here? Josie demanded. What do you mean? You don't get to walk out of my life and then walk back in and be all judgmental. Kate, are you blind? The man looks morbidly ill. Kat shook her head in confusion. You should be buying him groceries, not the other way around. Is he sick? Taking too many drugs? You know he's in recovery. Are you sure about that? Of course I'm sure. He's my friend. I see him every day. He helps me with dinner. He's been present in my life. Unlike some people. Josie studied Kate. Okay, I guess I deserved that. But this has been hard on me too. She reached out her hand to touch the tips of Kate's fingers. Kat wanted to relent, to take Josie in her arms, to show her what she'd been up to, and how she'd spent the time after their breakup. But she wasn't sure her heart could take their rejection. Are you doing anything tonight? Why don't you come over? Get here early, and you can help me prep, say 6. I've got to finish this. She paused, indicating the giant vegetable, before continuing. I have an art exhibit coming up. Josie's face lit up. Oh, Kate, that's wonderful. I always knew you were bet. Their eyes locked, but Kat glanced away first and walked over to the door. So tonight? Josie nodded. I can't wait. Kate watched Josie pace about the room. Throughout the dinner, Josie became increasingly antsy. Why couldn't she enjoy herself like everyone else? When Barry left, Josie practically slammed the door behind him. She took a deep breath and scrutinized Kat. What did you think of dinner? Kat asked. She'd made a seafood cassoulet with fresh mussels, clams, and Copper River salmon, which had been caught that morning. Josie walked to the table and pulled out a chair for Kat before taking a seat herself. Kat, we've got to talk. Okay, but you could come right out and just say you hated the meal. Damn it, Kate. The meal was great, but you can't see what is going on right in front of you. What are you talking about? Not a single person at your table appeared healthy. Your mother was puffy with chub, which is a far cry from the Shar I know. Barry looks like he's close to turning sideways. To waddle through your door, not to mention his skin is sickly and sallow. The only person who seemed remotely robust was the fisherman Barry invited. But he hasn't been coming to your soirees, has he? What does that have to do with anything? Why can't you be happy for me? Kat stood. Look around you. Something is seriously off. Since when do you cook like a Michelin chef? Everyone is gorging like mosquitoes, ready to lay eggs. Your friends have put on weight, yet you can't keep any on. Don't you wonder about your sudden obsession with food? I think you should go. Kate, open your eyes. Something's not right. It's that pan, isn't that what you said? Earlier, you found the pan and suddenly became inspired. Seriously, Josie. Leave. Anger seethed under the surface of her skin. How dare she try to ruin all Kat worked to build? Josie stood, going to the coat rack for her purse. She turned suddenly and grabbed Kat's wrist. If you don't believe me, can you promise to take Barry to a doctor? Get him checked out. Kat yanked her arm away. Since when do you care about Barry? Jesus, Kat, I don't. But obviously you do. Wake up to what is going on around you. Take a break from cooking with that stupid pan you're obsessed with. What if you were poisoning everyone around you? Have you bothered to research your magical pan at all? If it's so bad, then why is the restaurant so popular? Why are my dinner parties so successful? Josie shook her head. I don't know, Kat, but maybe you should find out. Damien died first. A sudden cardiac arrest. When he collapsed, he was pulling her pan out of the oven. The skin melted off his face like butter before anyone realized he was down. His casket was closed. Unable to stomach stepping foot into his restaurant, Damien's sister hosted the wake. At her home, Mira was his behind-the-scenes business manager. Kat had never met her. She found Mira sitting in her kitchen, her head clutched between her palms. I'm so sorry about Damien. The words fell flat. Her grief was all-encompassing, but her expression of it felt as meaningless as sentiment written on toilet paper. Mira glanced up. Your Kat? Surprised, Kat nodded. Mira's vitriolous hiss startled her. You're the one who started his ridiculous fixation. Kat sat back, her face heating with embarrassment. Mira stared at Kat. Those damn baked goods he compulsively cooked in that uglipan of yours. He couldn't stop talking about new recipes, concocting original flavors, and always bringing his inventions to the house, obsessing about being the best, and always sampling, nibbling, eating. She scowled at the table. Kat's eye rested on a family photo hanging on the wall. From the kids' ages, it looked like it had been taken about a year earlier, revealing a much slimmer Mira. A prickly chill cooled her. She pulled her sweater tight. I don't know your plans for the restaurant. Oh, we'll have to close. That was Damien's dream. She trailed off as a tear trickled down her cheek. Before you sell anything off, I was hoping to grab my pan. Mira peered up in disbelief, and Kate rushed on. I'm not in a hurry or anything, but I wouldn't want to lose it. It was my grandmother's. Mira studied her for a long moment before responding. You're welcome to your devil. When she hadn't seen Barry for a few days, Kat began to fret. She was picking up her mail when another neighbor told her about his ambulance ride. Kat hurried to the hospital. When she arrived in his room, she couldn't reconcile fever on the bed with her Barry. His cinnamon skin was blotchy and pallid. The long raven hair, the pride and joy of his heritage hung in lank, greasy clumps. When he opened his eyes, rotten yolks were revealed. Kat became afraid. Hey, Kit Kat. His voice was raspy, like it hadn't been used in months, not days. Barry, why didn't you call me? I would have been here in an instant. Kat put her hand over his, clasping it gently. I didn't want to trouble you. He gasped with a dry cough. What happened? A sad smile touched his lips. Guess my hard life in the old days caught up with me. But you're not old. Apparently, pancreatic cancer isn't picky about age. Oh, Barry, no. Tears burst from her eyes. Don't you worry. I'm going to beat this. I just need a little TLC. Maybe you could bring me some consomme. That will fix me right up. Kat desperately wanted to believe him. She chopped, simmered, and poured all her love into the broth. But it didn't fix him up. Barry was dead within the week. After her mother's funeral, Kat gutted her paintings. Taking a knife from her butcher block, she stabbed at the swollen fruits and burgeoning vegetables. The air in the apartment became viscous, with the rancid decay spilling from their seams, redolent of the sulfur from her nightmares. She snapped the wooden frames across her knees, utilizing a mallet when the bruises became too much. When she was calm enough to think, Kat moved to her computer. She couldn't shake. Josie's words ricocheted through her head. Had she poisoned the people she loved? She needed to find a way to jettison the pants and stop this from happening to anyone else. Not at first. She thought she might be able to melt the metal, but the internet informed her that, without a forge, it wasn't possible. She grabbed Barry's keys off her counter. He owned a vintage bottle green Ford Thunderbird. His brother lived in another state and had asked Kat to keep an eye on his things until he came back. It took 2 trips because of their weight. When she got into the car, she opted for a remote beach that Barry had introduced her to, a few hours away. On her drive, she stopped at a hardware store to pick up a sledgehammer and work gloves. All through the trip, her gut raged and screamed with hunger. Everything from seared scallops, coquille au vin, and an innovative take on gâteau Saint-Honore assaulted her mind. She visualized Barry's unnatural eyes, her mother's unrecognizable face, and Damien's closed casket to keep herself from driving to the grocery store and heading back home. When she got to the beach, the waves blended with the sky and shore in one monotonous shade of gray. The wind blew, shoving against her as she hauled the pans out of the car to the dead logs scattered at the high tide line. It took some time to break down the baking instruments into shards. She felt small, enough to toss into the ocean. The brittle metal proved no match for her grief. Rain fell from the clouds, making the hammer and shards slick. She often missed her target. Several times she had to sit down and rest, her arms burning with unaccustomed effort. As the sky darkened and the tide rose, her hunger finally abated. Piece by piece, she hurled the remains into the crashing sea, repeating the names of those she lost, promising never to forget. Afterwards, she slept dreamlessly in the car, exhaustion pulling her down as surely as the tide sucked the remnants of the skillet and muffin tin. Kat woke with the sunrise, amazed at how the sun brought out the blue-green of the sea, the khaki of the sand, and the cerulean of the sky. Her hands itched for her paint, reminding her in a flash of the work she'd shredded at home. She considered the pieces, hanging at the gallery, all the pieces sold. She frowned, losing the ephemeral thread of thought. Instead, the neon brilliance of the 24-hour drive-in chain down the road took its place. She started the car and drove off, the ocean in a rearview mirror. Nathan watched the dirt swirl as he kicked at the small shells littering the beach. His mom's boyfriend was okay. He did give him $5 to buy something at Larry's Gas and Guzzle. However, knowing they were trying to get rid of him made him feel like he was being paid to leave, which tainted the fun of spending. He often wished he had a brother or sister to boss around. Heck, he'd even take being bossed if that's what it took to not be lonely. His Converse left prints in the wet sand, and he was about to turn around when something caught his eye. Squatting down, he saw an unusual black pebble sticking out of the sand. Getting on with his hands and knees, he dug around the object until he discovered it wasn't a rock at all. It was a toy soldier. Further along the shore, he spotted little dark objects peppering the strand. He ran along the shoreline, collecting as many as he could. He pulled his red sweatshirt into a basket, using it to collect his find. When he could no longer outrun the waves, he wrapped the bundle tight against his chest. He walked up the beach to the soft, dry sand where grizzled seagrass grew. Sitting on a small slope, he studied his treasures. The obsidian figures were made of a heavy, dark metal that twinkled with different colors, depending upon how he turned them in the sun. These were unlike the cheap green soldiers his friends had. He boasted both men and women and posed not only with weapons, but like real people taking their leisure. Each soldier was intricately designed with fine details, like the creases around one man's eyes or the delicate ash dangling from a half-smoked cigarette. None of them had the same face. If he squinted his eyes, he almost thought he could detect subtle movement. The bright joy of imagination filled him. The metal warmed his hands, and he knew he'd discovered something special. And by extension, he would be special too. He stood, filling his sweatshirt pocket with his cash, excited to show his friend Micah. In his hand, he held a lone soldier transfixed by the swirling eddies of color. Through my peephole, I saw that it was still there. The flayed skin glistened under the dim glow of the hanging incandescent light bulb. It knew I was watching and came close until the peephole framed only its visage. The conjoined faces of my neighbors stared into me, with mouths that might have been kissing once. They grinned or tried to. Their tongues had fused to become fat and forked, and they now used to lick at the glass of my peephole. It pulls back without warning, and once more, I get a good look at it. Two human forms were smashed together. The smaller one clings to the larger one's torso, resembling a gibbon, and her young but distorted into something fleshy and vile. I can see the sinew of its exposed muscles, the blood vessels, and the flaps of flesh that hang off it. I can see the hanging skin testicles on the larger body, and I can see that the clinging body grinds itself into him where their groins meet. But whether it's in agony or ecstasy, I can't tell. It runs off into the dark corners of the hallway, but I'm not fooled. I know it's trying to lure me out, and I don't want to find out why. I need your help, please. I'm trapped on the 4th floor of Rochester Heights, in room 405, a dilapidated high-rise apartment in East Oakland. Within the last 6 hours, at what must have been dead midnight, something horrible happened. Whether it was an invading force or a corrupting evil, I don't know, but I can't leave, and my room is the only safety I have. And even then, I don't know how long until it gets in. I'll have to go back and recount all that's happened leading up to this, and maybe, just maybe, someone can help me. It all started with that damn fetish. Not the sexual perversion type. No, it was an idol. It was 4 a.m., and I was about to throw in a load of laundry before I was off to bed. And there it was. Splayed out smack dab in the middle of our laundromat. He's still slick with blood. I didn't know what I was looking at. Some spindly thing strung up to a wooden crescent frame. But with each passing second, more of its form registered in my mind, and I nearly doubled over and lost my breakfast at the realization that it was a skinned, headless dog, crucified. The cops were called, and it was found out that the new cameras, touted by management, and used as a justification for yet another outrageous rent hike, were nothing more than a deterrent. As in, they're useless and not even hooked up to a power source. They've let my bathtub sink halfway into the room underneath me. So while it was infuriating, I wasn't surprised. Later, it came to be known that the dog was Mrs. Laurent's beloved poodle, Butterball. The poor widow was hysterical and demanding a full-scale investigation. She might have gotten her way had nightfall not greeted us with yet another fucked-up finding. Harold, a shut-in who lived on the top floor, was found dead. I'm a night owl through and through, so I was awake when the discovery was made. There was no commotion but hushed whispers and tensed bodies. I tend to creep around the stairwell between the 4th and 3rd floors since it's scarcely populated and has a small accessible window that I can smoke out of. I was trying to fish for a signal. This time since my Wi-Fi was acting up and my cell signal was dead altogether. That's when I heard them walking down the stairs, talking. Eliana and Macy are from the 4th floor. I could tell from their tone of voice that something was wrong. 2 a.m. no one but me was up this late here most days. I strained my ears to listen in. Folded like a fucking pretzel, and there was a mess everywhere. Tony says he thinks he's been there since they found the hag's dog in the laundromat. He tried calling the cops, but it's not going through. Elia was whispering to Macy. Well, who was it? Macy asked. It's that creeps Harold from the 2nd floor. The one that Carter beat up for stalking his girlfriend. What was her name? John. It's Joanna. Don't be mean. This is serious. What did Tony do about the body? Sorry, I just think she's frumpy and plain. Way out of Carter's league. And nothing yet. He told the manager, and he tried calling the police too, but with no luck. He wants the body out of here as soon as possible, so he sent Tony out to the station in person. But it's been 2 hours since, and he hasn't even texted me once. I'm starting to get worried. No, that would be dramatic of me. We're not even dating, just messing around. Still, you know the Donut Royal is open 24/7. We can get a few and meet Tony halfway there. Eliana said, and the two started walking down the stairs. He froze, and the thought of trying to sneak away came to me too late. The two women didn't even acknowledge me as they walked past me. I knew three things then. Eliane is fucking our maintenance man, that I'm either invisible or detestable enough to be invisible, and that Harold was dead. I wouldn't know it then, but I would learn later that night that this was just the beginning of a nightmare. I finished my cigarette and sulked back upstairs, still unaware that anything was wrong. I should have paid more attention to my surroundings during my trek, because I'm certain that by then it had started. I only picked up on the fact that every light was dimmer. Not by much, but enough for it to be noticeable. I went back to my room, bolted the door, and tried getting my laptop to connect to the internet again. The only 2 pages it loaded up were ones I already had opened before the Wi-Fi shut out at it, and a random porn site that only played a very low-quality section of a video I was trying to get off to. It wasn't cutting it, so I decided to use my imagination. But after 15 minutes and a cramped hand, I decided to try to settle in for an early night. I gave it up after 45 restless minutes and pressed my ear against the wall next door. The couple there, Joanna and Carter, were young and hot-blooded, fucking all hours of the night, and I'd gotten off to the sounds a few times. Sometimes they went at it around the building in communal spaces they thought were empty in the late hours of the night. I had caught them a few times, but it was never reciprocated. They'd finish and sheepishly walk away, and none were wiser of my presence. Now they were quiet, except for the natural shifts and breathing that came with sleep. I wondered if they knew Harold was dead, and I wondered how they'd react when they found out. I wasn't there for the supposed blowout between him and Carter, but I had heard about it. Macy and Elilana loved to gossip above my smoking spot. I think Harold caught them like I had, and the poor fellow, trapped within the cage of his delusions, confronted Carter. Everyone knew he had a thing for Joanna, and she was too polite or sympathetic to ever be stern with him. So he must have interpreted it as reciprocation, and it ended with him getting stomped out, and the residents being quietly grateful for it. Poor Harold was in his mid-40s and living with his geriatric mother, because he was too messed up in the head to go anywhere else. Mary was her name, I think, and then I felt a horrible tinge of guilt. Did she know of her son's death? And where was she? I hoped she had her mind completely slipped away tonight, so that she couldn't comprehend what had happened to Harold. I used to fear ending up like him the most, but that was before tonight. Sleepless and frustrated, I felt the ache for another cigarette, and I went for a smoke. I pondered why no one else was freaking out about his death or why it was being kept secret. I didn't consider it until then. But if he was dead and he truly died in such an agonized way, who had done it? And were they still around? Cold sweat trickled down my face at the question, and I felt compelled to turn around and head back to my room. After 2 more steps, I decided to do just that, but something else was off. The hallway was darker now, much more than before, and the air was cold in a way that's hard to describe. It's bitter and chilling, piercing straight into nerves and bones. Vertigo threatened to overcome me with each passing moment, as the persuasive wrongness intensified. I couldn't define it at first, but as I kept walking, it became clear that the hallway was longer than it should have been. I froze, unable to make sense of that fact, and I scrutinized my surroundings a bit more. The ceiling was higher too, by a few feet. My mouth was dry now, and I tried to swallow, but nothing could bring me back to lucidity. Foot over foot, I forced myself to walk back towards my room, and I was halfway there when, once more, my heart stilled in abject fear. At the end of the hallway on the 5th floor, someone was descending the stairs. Rational thought should have driven me to head toward them and ask or warn them about what was happening. But some deep instinct knew was wrong, in all the ways a living thing could be. Even the stairs leading up to the upper floors felt wrong, as if they weren't of this world. I'd have to get closer to this approaching thing. I wanted to get to my room, so I turned back around and tried to dash as silently but quickly as possible down the hall. But I feared I would be spotted before I could fling myself down. What drew my attention the most was the many puddles and stains of crimson at their feet, and scraps of clothing. One of them obviously being Macy's distinctive denim jacket, One work boot lay on its side. One I thought might have belonged to a maintenance worker. I would not be leaving, not here. I tried to comfort myself by telling myself that whatever was keeping me here wasn't letting them in, but it wasn't reassuring in any measure. I ended up crawling underneath the shitty lobby desk and curling up into a ball for what felt like hours. It could have been longer, for all I know, but nothing mattered in that moment. I was fucked. Only when I heard the sound of a procession shuffling by did I stir. Peeking out of my hiding place, I saw the robed figures, 6 of them now. Upon their shoulders, they bore the weight of a marble slab, and upon it, a huddled figure. I watched them, backs to me, shuffle down the room and into the hallway that led to the manager's office. I tried sulking out as silently as possible to bear witness to the ritual that was about to unfold. The bearers lowered themselves in the slab, and as light gleamed across it, I realized who it was. The body was bent back into itself until it formed. The belly was pointed out to the world, the back and spine contorted and twisted, and the eyes empty. But goddamn the mouth. Harold was grinning ear to ear in an expression of pure ecstasy. The chanting began then, as the flung back and twisted glare of Harold's body lay upon me. Strange, throaty vocalizations, deep, reverberating, and inhuman. The sound of a mountain splitting apart or 2 worlds coming together. The vibrational forces of the universe melted away a border that kept the background machinations of reality unseen. Somehow, I knew this, that we had been pulled into this nightmare, but by what or who I still didn't know. They continued the hum chants until the space in front of them began to ripple like water, and when they ceased, so did the distortion. Half a heartbeat passed before it shattered, like glass, and beyond it was a massive eye. I flinched, hoping it didn't see me, but if it did, it must have not cared since it retreated back into the darkness. Before it hauled itself out, a spindly arachnid leg, covered in jagged angles and spines, stepped out, followed by another and another, until a towering, pinwheeled monstrosity of legs and appendages emerging from a central core stood before the cultists. An eye with concentric pupils was at its center, and the rest of it radiated out like a sea urchin. Every aspect of it told of the agonies it could inflict. It looked like pain incarnate, with the sheer number of sharp corners and serrated spines. Every inch of its being was meant to cause harm, and the longer I looked at it, the more detail came to me. Hooks and scythed ends, tendrils laden with hungry, gnashing mouths. That stood out the most was the way it distorted the space around it. Though it was within a confined space, as I gazed upon it, it seemed to expand the air around it, so that some hidden aspect of itself could be felt. This was a part of a much larger whole, and I got the impression that some massive hands on a cosmic scale held this thing out before us, yet they were one and the same. I looked away, not wanting to gaze upon this abomination, this emanation of pain, any longer. It spoke in an alien language then, a sound so vile as a rusty nail being dragged along my eardrums and corneas, but I understood it. Unmistakable gratitude. I slunk back into my hiding spot and waited for it to be over. I waited for them to leave, and they did, moving through the hallway, past the stairs into the basement laundromat and into the community room. It's been hours since, and they've still not emerged. I took the time to try to silently rummage around in the manager's office. Next to a pile of fine pulp of flesh that still had Mr. Roderick's weeping face, our landlord, an axe, I picked it up, knowing it would be of no use to me, should I face those cultists or the pain entity. What I did know is that Harold had a role to play in this in some way or another, and that his room was just a floor above. If there's any chance of escape or answers, they will be there. If you don't hear back from me, I'm dead. I'm certain that there's no way anyone from outside this hell can help. And even then, I still ask that you'll wish me luck. I certainly know I'll need it. Rochester Heights had always been a hellhole. I know that now. I mean, I never doubted that some of the people here were assholes, but in the time I've had to reflect, I realize how either indigent or cruel they were to each other. Maybe when people group together like that, with no goal beyond inhabitants, unpleasant things arise. I lamented once that to them. I was nothing but a sulking shadow, only half remembered. Once my landlord had forgotten, I even lived there and sent Tony to get the place ready for a new tenant. Now, I'm not so sure I mind as much. Being one of the forgotten ones might have saved my life. I was ready for the horrors of the second-floor hallway, meeting the grasping hands with an overhead axe swing that nearly severed one hand at the wrist. Pulling back, I used the butt end to smash away another grasping hand until I could slip past. Sarah Palmer was next, swiveling around in her mobility scooter to face me, but it was too late. The heel of the axe sank into flesh as soft as putty, and as I yanked the axe loose, half her face slowed off. I heard her chuckle as I ran past. Something was burning in me. Even if I died here, I had to know the what and how of Rochester's descent into madness. Harold's room door was still ajar, and I made sure to bolt the door the moment I ran in. Only then did I slowly turn around. I thought it was graiphoria at first. I had read about it one late night, a disorder most often associated with schizophrenics, the incoherent ramblings, written and spoken. The living room floor and adjacent floor contained countless sharp-edged sigils and glyphs. They looked occultic in their configurations, but the actual characters themselves were completely foreign. The dead center of the circle was free of the scrawl but stained with brownish-red blood. I knew it was where Tony had found Harold's body. There was a journal left on the coffee table, and flipping through it, I confirmed that it was his. In the few minutes I had in that room, I didn't have much time to really understand its contents. And though I still have it, and I've spent hours since poring over it, I've only been able to come up with a rudimentary understanding of what Harold was onto. I'll summarize it here the best I can. Harold moved back in with his mother, after an episode that cost him his job a year prior. They lived off her Social Security checks, and he deeply resented her for her advanced age. Every day she'd wake up with less of her mind intact. He was also having issues with extreme sexual frustration and began clinging delusionally to Joanne's politeness as a signal that she wanted him. The confrontation with her boyfriend, Carter, was the breaking point. It wasn't the reason why he did all this, but it was the final straw. But he had reason to resent everyone here, and he detailed all his grievances, big and small. I learned then the difference between being someone pushed to the side, but still scrutinized with an eye of assumed threat like Harold, and being forgotten altogether. Like in his pages upon pages of detailed slides, never once did my name come up. My existence failed to register with someone who was uncomfortably similar. It made me feel bitter, and I don't know why. Then there was talk of what he dubbed the background world. I still don't quite understand what it is and its purpose, but that's the thing that ties this all together. I'll let Harold explain in his own words. I first saw it in a dream, then in a vision. It started with a tusked worm taking a bite out of the thin air, and like a scalloped finger, it peeled back what I thought was real to show me the machinations that ran behind what could be seen. Two places within the same space were never allowed to touch or interact. As above, so below, and from below to above, everything is mirrored. If it exists here in our layer, it exists below, within the background world. That was the first rule it told me. The most important for creating an environment where we can finally meet. The second rule is that for an autarch to touch the human domain, something must be offered to it. A life or part of one. Most often, the offering is from someone else. The greater the offering, the more an autarch can manipulate the human domain, as long as it's within its sphere of influence. The most powerful offerings are oneself, a year of your life, or the greatest joy you'll ever feel. The greatest offer one can make to an autarch is your own life. There's more. He mentions that the autarch he's in contact with is one that operates within the sphere of agony. Pain is its domain, and Harold knew pain better than most. The best I can piece together is that somehow he came into contact with this entity. Maybe it preyed on him for being vulnerable, or maybe its influence scrambled his thoughts, or maybe what he learned was too much for any mind to bear without consequence. I say this because I don't believe that Harold was crazy ill and in need of help, but there are enough commonalities in the strange runic language and his journaling that it feels as if he was truly uncovering something. He was not a stark, raving madman, at least not until he let himself sink deeper into the influence of what had been encircling him. He spent the week, leading up to the fateful night of his death, preparing for Rochester's fall into the background. 16 fetishes were placed around the apartment to mark the boundary for where the autarch would lift the veil and let emerge. 6 of them were made from parts of his mother, the rest from stray animals and peats around the apartment. The last of them was Mrs. Lawrence's dog in the laundromat. Mirrored above and below, even if they were removed, they still created something in the background world that sanctioned this hell. Harold lamented that he never placed one in the basement below it, and that was my chance. Maybe, just maybe, the building was only partially within the interior, and if I could make it to the second basement and emerge, it would be into the outside I had always known. Or maybe I'd step right into the background world. Regardless, I had no choice but to try. I scrounged around the apartment and found that Harold was a heavy drinker with a taste for cheap vodka. I fashioned 5 Molotovs with what he had and started the trek back down to the first floor. The storage closet to my right, that was never locked, served as my refuge, and I tried to slink into it as quietly as possible. The closet used a repurposed apartment door, so it had a peephole for me to gaze out of. Minutes passed by at an agonizing pace, but it did eventually come into view. From the periphery, it emerged, robed in ornate, and moving as if it were dancing on air. Upon looking down, I saw that it was skating across the air, legless and floating. From its hood, a strange blinking light cast out onto the dark hallway. As it was at eye level with me, and directly in front of me, I caught a side profile of its face, and I held my breath to stifle a gasp. Its face was like TV static, flickering in black and white chaos. I closed my eyes then, fearing that it would turn to face me and that I'd get an unadulterated look at it. In the still moments, as I waited for it to fling the door open, I thought to all the other strange shit I had heard about leading up to now. Tony had found nearly a dozen dead animals around the apartment perimeter in the last few days. He didn't want to talk about the state he found them in, and I wondered if they were anything like butterballs, skinned and crucified. I waited until my body ached, and I mustered the courage to peer into the hole once more. An empty hallway greeted me, and I slowly opened the door and crept my way out. This floor was only occupied by me, Macy, Eliana, Carter, and Joanna. I went to their door and caught myself when I went to knock. I hesitated for a moment. Before I tried the knob, I winced as it creaked open, and I made my way in, trying to close the door as quietly as possible. I called out for them in a hushed voice, but as I looked around their empty living room, I felt silly. Before I left, I decided to check their room. Someone needed to know about the wrongness of what was happening, and I still don't know what the fuck is happening. I didn't recognize them at first. I thought it was a pile of blankets, but as the heavy movement and labored breath caused something to click in my head, I couldn't stifle the yell. It caused the head, or more aptly, heads to snap up to face me, and I had no delusions of what it was. Carter and Joanna permanently joined at their groins, chests, and mouths. They had been fucking missionaries when it happened. So Carter had his body draped over Joanna's, and her arms and legs clasped around his torso, waist, and ass. I thought they had been flayed at first, but the more I looked, the more it seemed like the flesh had sloughed off them. They hoisted itself up on all fours, if you can call it that, and let out a breathy moan in both male and female voices. The conjoined mouth grinned at me, and as it took a step towards me, I finally snapped out of it. We both ran at the same time, but it was slowed by its deformed mass. The distance between us was still too close for any comfort as I ran out into the hallway and towards my room. I thanked God that I hadn't locked my door as I threw it open and turned to slam it shut. I screamed the moment I was face to face with the abomination, and without a moment to spare, I bolted and locked it. It tried the knob a few times before it resorted to gentle taps, then deafening pounding, and then silence. Now it's just waiting there for me. But what I fear most is that whatever did that to them will come around, lured by its presence, and do the same. It's been hours since, but the sun has not risen. I tried sleeping in the bathtub. I couldn't stand the proximity of my bed to Joanne's and Carter's. But when I stepped in, I remembered that half the tub couldn't support my weight as water left it half sunk into the floor. So I went back to the living room and saw my laptop still sitting there with this webpage open. Please, if anyone can help me or has any ideas, now is the fucking time. I don't know how much longer I have left. Just now I decided to peer out my window and was greeted by Stygian darkness. But what really scares me is the few breaks in it. Occasionally, lighting flashes across the sky and illuminates the world below, a lifeless sand sea. Lighting cut through in brilliant flashes, stained by black and white patterning like TV static. A lot has happened since my last post, but I'd like to thank you all for your suggestions, especially the bathtub suggestion. Salt is ineffective against whatever is happening here, and I've learned my lesson about trying to make static noise. I haven't slept since, and Joanna and Carter are still prowling the hallway fucking with me. I can only guess that whatever warped their bodies also twisted their minds. I thought I was screwed, but then I was reminded of the bathtub. I went to it with my pack filled with a few bottles of water and my laptop. The landlord and management have known about it for 6 months now. Water had seeped into the walls and started to rot away the floor, so much so that the bathtub's far end was noticeably sunk in. When I showered, I hugged the drain, and fearful that my weight would cause it to fall through the floor. Now I went to that end and stepped in. It sagged and groaned with my weight but held, so I started jumping on it, landing with as much force as I could muster, until on the third try the floor gave way and I went with it. I landed badly, cracking my side across the outer rim of the tub and had the wind knocked out of me, but I had done it. My tube and some of the floor were in my downstairs neighbor's bathroom. Picking off bits of debris, I struggled to my feet and stepped out into the living room. A single mother named Naomi lived here, with 2 toddlers. I had never talked to her but had a brief interaction with her son, who asked me my name for all things. I knew they often spent the night at her baby daddy's house. Once again, Eliana's and Macy's gossip keyed me in, and it held true tonight. The living room and bedroom were empty, and I was grateful. I tried to hurry as my fall down a floor wasn't exactly silent, and if anything else was out there, it surely was heard. I rushed down the hallway in long strides, trying not to look, but there were details you could not help but notice. A section of brick wall had discolored monochrome, black and white, and then faded red. I didn't stop to observe. I had to keep moving. Only once I came upon several blood-stained doors did my pace slow, but I didn't stop. I tried not to think about the people who lived there or what had happened to them, but by now the apartment should have been full of the sounds of life instead of the bleak, oppressive silence I was drowning in. I made it to the stairs and practically leapt down an entire flight of stairs to the 2nd floor. My blood was pumping and my confidence was high. I was running now. This hallway was warped like the one on the 4th floor, but in much more extreme ways. The walls had not only narrowed, but they were slanted, warping and turning at an angle with every foot until the hallway was nearly spiraled. I had to slow to a stop to get my bearings, as it was also dizzying. The floor beneath my feet ceased to be shitty faux wood laminate and was replaced with a smooth stone that felt almost slippery. The brick walls had melted away to some mottled and stringy maroon cloth thrown over what looked to be grating made of the same smooth stone. It looked almost organic, but at the same time, it could have been fabric. The thick, dangling strands made me think of sea anemone and tendrils, and I shuddered at the thought of touching them. So I forced myself to run once more, past an open door to a room that had a body perfectly bisected and sprawled out on the floor. The pile of intestines between the 2 halves is writhing and rising into the air. It freaked me out enough that I ran past the next open door with my eyes shut tight. It was Harold's room. I feared seeing what had become of him. I thought mercy was on my side as the hallway eventually straightened out, and the next half-dozen doors were shut. But as I came up to the last doors that lined the hallway, the one to my left flung open with incredible force. Flayed hands from a black void reached out to grab at me, and I pivoted out of the way just before they made contact. but I couldn't stop my momentum and went stumbling onto the cold, slippery floor. I tried scrambling back up as the door to my right opened, and from it, Sarah Palmer emerged. I knew it was her despite her corrupted form, flayed and covered in sinewy tumor-like growths. The severely obese woman had merged into her mobility scooter, and she used it to move forward. Sloughed flesh made it difficult as it had wrapped around the wheels, but still, it inched forward. The center of her abdomen had split open into a gaping hole, and with a quiver and a moan, it erupted with some vile bile-like fluid, as it vomited a small figure out onto the floor before me. The newly born child got up at the same time I did, and followed me in my panicked rush down the rest of the hallway and onto the stairway. The toddler-sized thing made of diseased and partially digested sinew was fast shrieking, like a joyous child as it closed the gap between us with a leap. It was my turn to shriek as I tried shaking it off. As it scaled up my back towards my shoulder, I took hold of the thing with my hands and pried it off. The flesh was gelatinous, and my fingers sucked into it in ways that made my stomach churn. "Tag, you're it!" The thing was said in a voice I thought was vaguely familiar. Disgust drove me to fling it at the wall with all the force I could muster, and its body crunched and splattered on impact with the wall that had reverted back to normal. It let out a small, pained groan as it slid off the wall into the floor. As I ran by, it spoke in an agonized whisper that I could not remove from my mind, no matter how much I tried. "Chris, why?" "I just wanted to play," it said, and I had to stifle a heaving gasp as I cleared the flight of stairs into the first-floor lobby. The only child who knew my name here was Naomi's son. They weren't supposed to be here, not tonight. They had always left on weeknights for their father's house. Had Naomi called off the attempts at reconciliation tonight of all nights? Or had this begun earlier than I had thought? I didn't know and wouldn't ponder it until I was out of this nightmare. The lobby was normal by all means except for the lack of lights, but now the darkness did nothing to deter me. The exit was right there, and I ran towards it. The double-glass doors froze me in place, not because they were bolted but because of what lay beyond. Pitch a dark world where nothing could be seen, except for the momentary brilliance brought out by flashes of lightning ripped across the sky like whips made of TV static. In those moments, I saw them, a line of things just waiting for me to step out. One was a smooth-skinned pale humanoid with a hole right through its chest that leaked inky black fluid. It had no face. Another was a tangle of violet tendrils that appeared to be made of smaller, writhing strands. Then there was one that was a massive looming serpentine thing, dotted with eyes the size of human heads, each iris alien in shape, and one end that I assumed to be. Its head was tusked with mandibles that must have been 6 feet in length. There were dozens of others, but their forms were too varied and abstract to ever accurately describe. Stepping into the hallway, I was greeted by them, the conjoined, endlessly fucking monstrosity that had started this. I greeted them with a sprinter's launching bolt and an axe swing. The sides of Carter's and Joanna's faces took the blow, and though the flesh came away in a huge chunk, and I heard the clinking of teeth splattering across stone floors, they didn't even flinch. Carter tried lunging at me, arm outstretched, but I flung myself against the wall and was trying to slip behind them. They pivoted around to try to face me, but the strange distribution of their weight made them cumbersome, and the fear I felt was another axe swing sank deep into compromised muscle and bone, cleaved through them far easier than uncorrupted tissues. It was enough to nearly decapitate them, and they let out this horrible wheezing gasp. Another lunging grasp was met with an axe blow that sent nearly half his fingers skipping across the ground, and one last swing to their neck finished it. Though their heads were on the floor before me, they did not die. What remained of their face was opening and closing its mouth, and I could see that the destroyed cheek was starting to restructure and regenerate. This truly was hell, willed into existence by a resentful heart. The body didn't fall and wasn't still either, jerking and twitching about. It eventually started grasping towards its head. I had the Molotov lit by the time it took hold of its neck and threw it in the moment it lifted it up. They erupted into a ball of fire, and I swore I heard screaming, as if some part of their warped mind registered what had just occurred, and I hoped that the fire would be enough to put an end to them. The second Molotov was thrown into the corner, where Sarah and the hands tried and failed once more to apprehend me. I was going to burn this place down if I could. Maybe then I would be able to spare them. The third was thrown atop the lobby desk. The last two were for the laundromat. I didn't know if the building would actually burn, but I wanted to do anything to cause some harm. The mad dash to the laundry was the fastest I've ever run. I'm sure of it. I was certain that the commotion and the fires would have caused the autarch and its cultists to emerge from management's office, but nothing ever impeded my flight down the stairs into the laundry room. I landed on soft floors, and the lights were now dim and blood red, but even then I saw the horror that lay before me. A pulsating mass, a conglomerate of flesh, formed at the center of the room, and it stretched out across the floor walls. Machines. Every inch was living tissue and sinews, nerves, blood vessels, all of it. A dozen limbs raked and reached out in the open air weakly, and I swore they had some identifying features. A watch that could have belonged to Jose from the 7th floor, a sleeve of a distinctive neon green sweater from Kiana, a college student. I didn't need another reason. The fourth Molotov was thrown on the fleshy floor behind me, and the final was directly at the tumor. The darkness was eclipsed by the burning sun that stood behind me. The threshold of the sub-basement and my hopeful exit were before me now, but I hesitated for a moment. The heat licked at my spine, and my eyes watered at the rising smoke. If I were wrong, I would be fucked, but I'd be fucked fire or not. He moved forward, and the moment my foot touched the first step, the world behind me plunged back into darkness as the fire was extinguished. In an instant, it all ceased, the curtain of silence, and a wave of dread rose. I knew. I shouldn't have looked back, but I couldn't help myself. With a thundering heart, I threw my gaze back and saw it. The odd arc of agony that had caused all this goaded and tempted Harold with its promise of pain to all he hated. The center of its eye blossomed before me and grew to encompass all before it in its vision. Yes, it was a vision that it showed me. Screams around me rose to a crescendo as the tumor grew to the size of the apartment itself, a living edifice. And yet it still paled in size compared to the autarch, who looked down on it. The countless tendrils in their instruments of torture reached down to the tower of flesh, and it raked, sliced, tore, ate, and it all grew back. It would continue to do so for eternity. That was a dark wish for Harold. The thing began to bulge and split apart, a perfect copy of its spherical form, mitosis. This thing could split itself, and that's how it planned to fulfill its promise and continue to operate without being bound to it. I screamed, or I think I did, because when I was able to pry my eyes away from it to look around, I saw the shadow of my exit, the descent into the sub-basement. I ran, refusing to look back. I wouldn't, and I couldn't look back, so into the murky depths I went. I had been in the sub-basement once before. It was small and damp, and had only a few fold-up tables and chairs. There were no entries or exits except a single narrow staircase and a seldom-used door, leftovers from a bygone era. It was barred and locked at all times, but the door was old and wooden, and I was certain it would only take a good kick to break it down. But what lay before me was not the basement. No, it was some dark plane of reality that could not have been the background world. I had seen brief glimpses of it just outside my window, and this was different, narrow and claustrophobic. But at the same time impossibly expansive. Light did not exist here. Even when I tried my lighter, the air around me wicked away illumination. I reached out to touch the concrete walls and found that I was in a tunnel. With no other option, I walked and walked until time ceased to have meaning. I know I must have been there for hours since hunger and exhaustion forced me to rest, but comfort was impossible, so after a few minutes I got back up and pushed forward. When at last I came upon an exit dimly illuminated, it hurt my eyes that had been bathed in darkness for so long. A shallow staircase that led down to the sub-basement I had always known. The door was there, and with a frenzied kick, it fell away, and I burst out into the world above with a half scream of joy and a half-maddened sob. It was midday, and Rochester Heights did not exist anymore. I had emerged from a sub-basement into an empty, overgrown lot. A homeless man nearby turned to glare at me, momentarily before returning to whatever he was doing. Nothing exists of my ordeal, and no one even remembers Rochester Heights. I've done searches on the residents, and it's like they don't exist. Everything and everyone marked by the agony autarch have ceased to exist meaningfully or have been rewritten out of history. I found Macy's mother and called to ask about her daughter, and she swore to me she never had children. The company that owns the lot told me it's been unoccupied and on the market for half a year. I've not been the same since my escape from Rochester Heights. There's so much left in this goddamn journal, but every time I look at it, I get this sense of overwhelming doom. There's so many questions. If what exists below is reflected above, and vice versa, how has the world changed? Now, as I speak, there's a tower of flesh that rises high above the world below, and it casts its long shadow into the world above. I shudder to think about how it will manifest. I know Rochester Heights has cast its shadow over me and darkened my heart one way or another. The people there didn't deserve what happened to them, and Harold deserved better, but in hatred or love, their gaze eluded me. Once, I resented that, but now I find solace in it. The nightmares will never end, and I will never be okay. But at least anyone who casts its hateful gaze upon our world will see nothing but a shadow in my place. When my father came back from the military, we bought our first house. A boxy, two-story affair on the woodsy outskirts of town. I was 12, going on 13 then. Our neighborhood was a little off the beaten path, nestled somewhere between shaded canopy roads and miles upon miles of Tallahassee timber. After school, if I didn't have a scout meeting or any more chores left, I'd hop on my bike to find friends to hang out with. The only rule was to be home before the streetlights came on. Throughout all my childhood, my folks never asked where I was going or what I was doing for the day. My summers were spent playing in the woods with my friends. It was the perfect place to turn off the world for a while, like you were miles away from any sort of responsibility. Nothing but dirt and adventure. We played war for hours, following deer trails and bridge jumping into freezing creeks, and always knew to get the hell out of Dodge when riders blasted their way down the trails. The last of us to move always won. Honestly speaking, we were no different from any other group of dumb kids hurting themselves for laughs and style points. Self-injury is the oldest form of amusement, after all, and for a group of skinny, bored desperados, how could we not be just a little bit reckless? Sprained ankles, bleeding arms, and scuffed knees were all par for the course. My friend Joel once pulled a tree branch back and let it fly straight into the face of Teddy Mare. It struck Teddy so hard that his head whipped back and his lip inflated like a balloon. He lost his last baby tooth that day. Sometimes, if we ever felt up to it, we'd make the trek to Hollow Sink Park to stare at the sinkholes that tourists came to gawk at. The park was littered with them, but we mostly went to see the dismal maw. At least we did until some kid drowned in it. A friend of mine once said he saw the boy's white face staring at him from the black water. I figured he was full of shit. I knew the woods like the back of my hand, and other than a decent escape for us, they had also become a series of shortcuts we could use to reach each other's houses, lickety-split. It's hard to get lost if you memorize landmarks and stick to the damn trail. Neglecting that is how most poor souls end up on the news. One evening, I was with Joel in his garage, trying to complete our construction of a bike ramp for the summer. Despite the sky draining to a dense, bruised color, I stupidly let him razz me into staying just a bit longer to get more of the ramp done. If not for the looming threat of my old man ripping me a new one, we'd probably have had it all finished. But I waved him off and rode the bike home. I decided to cut through the woods. It was my only chance to beat the automatic circuits of the streetlights that were waiting for enough light to disappear. I followed down the path as it dipped into a creek and then smoothed out into a single-track lane. Wet clods flew off my tires as the gears buzzed and jittered along the trail. I was still saving up for one of the fancier rock hoppers that riders used, but until then, my clunky hybrid was enough to get me around. The sun dropped like a beacon in the distance, taking away what time I had left. I kicked it up a notch, speeding through the trees and the Spanish moss that hung from them like a hippie's dreadlocks. But just as I crested the brow of a hill, I suddenly had to stop. My upper body jerked forward off the seat as I slammed on the brakes and brought myself to a crunching halt along the grit. Ahead of me, just a yard or so away, the body of a white-tailed deer blocked the path. It was lying on its side, all four legs splayed out from under it. The skin had been torn away from its back, leaving the pelt to sag around the exposed flesh, damp with blood. Great chunks of meat were gone, carved out by sharp teeth from whatever had killed it. Somewhere within the ragged, chewed muscle, I thought I could make out the semblance of a spine. A fresh kill. Predators weren't uncommon here, but they mostly stuck to the human-free spaces of the forest. As many times as we explored this place, we very seldom saw them. Something moved out of the undergrowth. My eyes snapped toward it. My heels instinctively scraped the earth to back the bike up. A large black hound. It was a mangy-looking thing, romping out of the covert and toward the corpse. Maple wolf, I thought, as my eyes traced the thickets for any more signs of movement. There didn't seem to be any. Taking no notice of me, the hound bowed its head and began to sink its teeth into the carcass, pulling and tearing off more parts. The hound was covered in tangles of dark, scanty fur. I'd never seen a dog's coat so black, like it was more of a dog-shaped silhouette than anything else. The same pitch as a starless night sky. I backed away slowly, trying to raise as much distance from it, and me as possible as I rotated the bike around. A few rocks shifted and scuffed loudly under my tire. I had moved too quickly. The hound reared its shaggy head toward me. Its body rose up and stiffened, the sides of its dark muzzle quivering. Ropey strings of saliva dripped off its chin, falling over the remnants of what once was a deer's jugular now gripped in its teeth. The hound was big, maybe the size of a mastiff, maybe just a bit bigger. But what sent a ripple of static down my spine was the single white saucer it had for an eye. Dead center bulging outward from the animal's head, the eye held a vague whiteness without any hint of sight. The hound's body lunged forward, just as I twisted around and started beating the pedals. I went full throttle, riding the downhill burst at a neck-breaking speed. It's not after you, I told myself. It just wants you away from the deer. It doesn't want you. But it was coming. I knew it was. My bike wavered wildly back and forth along the rugged earth. I was standing up, pumping the pedals madly, and forcing the handlebars still. Against every instinct not to do it, I chanced to look back. It was right on me, closer than I had even pictured. The frothing, grinning teeth were mere inches from my rear wheel. I could see the bits of deer stuck between them. I could even see into that grotesque white eye and the faint, milky pupils staring at me behind the film. From out of its mouth, a pale, ghostly tongue slithered in and out. Despite how close it was, as crazy as this is to say, I could not hear it moving. Its legs, which were pounding into the earth to keep up with me, weren't making any sound at all. No crunching leaves, no haggard panting, just a silent shape drawing closer. I honestly thought I'd gone deaf in the panic. I could smell it, though. A pungent odor of blood and mange. All I could do was push harder, pumping my legs like engines that revved higher and higher. Air battered against my face, none of it making it to my lungs. The trees synced up in my peripheral vision, like slides on a projector screen. I pulled the phlegm down my throat. I veered to the right, ducking through a ribcage of skinny branches, and then onto a connecting trail. One branch got into my cheek, trickling out some blood. He risked another look. My swerve had gained some space between us. "Fuck you, lassie," my thoughts cheered as I pushed ahead. Then the world turned. My body was flung forward, like a rag doll as I crashed headfirst into the earth. No chance to adjust or recover. I fell hard. The wind was knocked out of me. Colors and textures became red and gritty. My palms were scraped raw, and both knees were bleeding. I gathered my bearings, trying to put together what had just happened. My bike was lying next to me. Its old chain snapped completely. The black shape of the hound was growing larger. It hadn't quit. I kicked off the dirt and broke off toward the closest, fattest tree I could find. Luckily, a large enough oak was nearby. I planted one dirt-streaked sneaker against it and pushed upward with the other. My hand stretched, and I managed to grab hold of one of the overhead branches. I pulled myself up and swung my leg over. At last, a sound reached me, the clack of teeth that barely missed their mark. The hound fell on its side in silence and quickly scrambled back to its feet. "Go away!" I screamed at it. "Go away!" The hound's face scrunched into a snarl, teeth bared, yet no sound came from it. Foam dribbled over its lips, the gums as white and bloodless as the tongue they shared a space with. Why? Why was it so driven to chase after me? Why was it so freakishly silent? Because it wants to hunt, and you're the next catch. My thoughts were answered. I wiped some blood off my cheek, gasping as realization finally caught up with me. I shuffled on the branch, patting down my pockets and turning them inside out. My flip phone was gone. My eyes scanned around for it, eventually finding its clamshell body lying next to the broken chain, left there from my tumble. Frustration flared. I smacked the trunk with the side of my fist, crunching one of the lichens growing there into flaky debris. Nobody knew where I was, save for Joel, who must have known I'd take the shortcut home. Maybe my folks would call his parents to say I hadn't made it back yet. Maybe they'd call the police to come looking for me in the woods. Maybe they wouldn't find me. I shook out the thoughts. There are too many fucking maybes. I sighed, wincing at the sting in my palms. At a side glance, I caught something on the tree, carved deeply into its gray bark. No names or initials, just the vague shape of a cat's head. The sun went down as more of the forest lost its color. The black hound paced and panted around the tree, its glare never leaving me. I stared longingly at the rocks surrounding us, wishing I'd been able to grab a few before climbing so that I could peg them at its face, especially at that single cyclops eye. A deformity, I thought, thinking of all the different sorts of birth defects, like two-headed snakes or an eight-legged goat. Still, that didn't explain how the hound was so unnaturally muted, quiet as a ghost. The night had now set in. The dark shape appeared to finally lose interest and vanish into the brush. I'd like to say I waited an hour longer in that tree, but it was probably closer to 20 to 30 minutes before I scanned the area restlessly, slowly building up the bravery to leave my roost. Somewhere beyond the thickets, a distant owl shrieked. I was ready. I made my way carefully down and planted both feet on the ground. It provided some relief, like I was one step closer to putting this all behind me. I made the few paces to my phone and scooped it off the dirt. The screen beamed with dull life. 10 missed calls from home. No doubt. They were waiting to discipline me when I got back, but that was the least of my problems. I arched my finger to return the call. Something fired out of the darkness, a flurry of silent, thrashing legs and a pallid, sickly orb pulling closer. I threw myself toward the tree, practically launching myself with each step as I beat desperately toward it. My hands once again gripped the branch, and I hoisted myself up. This time, I was too slow. Fangs found my leg and buried themselves deeply inside. Pain welled, shooting up in an erupting flare through me. Branches and leaves meshed in my vision. I let out an agonized cry. The bark splintered into my fingers, but I didn't dare let. Somewhere in my mind, I pictured a bear trap clamping its iron teeth into Bombi. The hound, now balancing on its hind legs, shook its sizable neck muscles, trying to twist me back toward the ground. Its teeth dug further through the nerves, sending a flurry of pins and needles surging up my leg and scattering around my hip. With everything I could, I mustered my free leg up and kicked at its muzzle with my heel. Through some cosmic mercy, its jaws were released. I swung my body the rest of the way up and planted myself back where the height favored me. Dark blood dripped down my leg and rolled over my sneaker. The pain heaved in waves and hot pulses. I buried my face against the gnarled bark and cried, not wanting to look at the wound, but I forced myself to peek at it. The tooth-shaped grooves left me lightheaded. "Don't faint," I snapped at myself. "Don't you dare faint." I looked down. My phone once again lay on the ground. I couldn't help but cry some more. The hound sat there and stared up at me, its bulbous cyclopean eye marking me in a world without end. Fresh blood, my blood this time, reddened the foam around its snout. It had waited the whole time, queuing itself up for me to let my guard down so it could take me out. I wasn't just trapped up there. I was a bird with a broken wing. Thank Christ, the hound couldn't climb. He bit back the tears, trying for a moment to picture myself acting tough in front of the guys. It helped somewhat. I resorted to calling out for help, hoping that, just by chance, someone might hear me and come looking. The hound once again vanished into the tree line, but I knew there wasn't a chance in hell. I was going down from the tree again. I could still feel the beast there, watching me from the bracken, waiting with tireless patience. For the rest of the night, I smacked away the gnats and mosquitoes trying to eat me alive. I can't say I blame them. I was probably a smorgasbord for their tiny alien mouths. I was cold, scared, and hurting. Every so often, another spasm of pain would shoot through my leg and fill my head with chilling thoughts. Nerve damage, infection, amputation. What if I could never run after this? What if there was nothing after this? It was impossible not to think about it. Every time the panic flared back up again, I would scream and shout for help until my throat went dry, desperately breathless. An eternity passed. The sky shifted to an orange-blue tone. Sunrise was on the way. Enough sunlight has now begun to brighten the forest. I fell back on shouting for help. Everything hurt, and a tempting need to vomit roiled in the pit of my gut. I clung to the tree and shouted whenever enough air allowed it. "Hey, is everything okay?" A man's voice eventually called. I looked down. There was a young couple parked on waspy yellow bikes, both of them wearing bright lycra jerseys. They'd happened to be riding the trails that early morning and heard my cries. "Kid," the Talish man called again. "Are you okay?" "There's a dog," I shouted back. "Watch out." Both their necks swiveled, but then they returned to me. The man approached my tree. The braided-haired girl remained on the trail, watching cautiously. I expected the one-eyed dog to burst through the growth at any moment and fall upon the man, while the woman recoiled in horror. But nothing happened. The hound had apparently gone away. They took me to the hospital. I got several stitches for the bite, a tetanus shot, and the first of a scheduled series of 5 anti-rabies shots. I was half expecting to still be reamed by my folks for putting myself in that position, but they were just happy I'd made it back home. Going from offender to survivor will do that for you. Even as my friends ribbed me, calling me scared or too chicken shit, I refused to ever step back into that godforsaken place. For the next 3 or so years I dreamed about the hound, but in my dreams I would never make it to that tree. My bike would fall apart, my legs would seize up completely, and even if I did reach the tree in some cases, the feeble branch I grabbed would snap and send me falling back into the jaws that wanted my life. In the summer of 2000, I went to prom with Riley Dean. She was a timid girl, surprisingly skittish for a cheerleader. We were absolute opposites, and to be honest with you, I never thought she'd say yes when I asked her to go with me. Halfway through the night, she couldn't find her inhaler. It had been left in my car. I set out to get it for her. I made my way across the parking lot, pulled the keys out of my pocket, and fiddled with the lock. From under the car, something snapped at my leg. I fell back onto the pavement, my hands and ass breaking my fall. A black shape sprang forward from beneath the car and seized the cuff of my dress pants. It was back. The hound. that same oily fur, the wriggling, slinking white tongue, and that one hellish eye holding no signs of life. I screamed and kicked frantically, blubbering for help like a lost child. My pants fabric ripped in its teeth. It launched again, this time finding flesh instead of polyester. The pain ripped through me, sending me 5 years back, to that night in the woods, screaming. Some people heard the commotion and ran over. The hound unclenched its teeth and ran off into the distance. I stared at the new ring of bite marks etched into my leg. Marked once again. An ambulance was called, and poor Riley Dean's prom was cut short by an ambulance ride for her prom date. I wish I could say that it was some sick stroke of bad luck, and that I just so happened to run into the same dog that had attacked me years earlier. But it was more than that. It took me 2 years after the second ambush to realize it. I moved out of Tally and went out of state to pursue college. I couldn't afford to live on campus, so I ended up leasing a small place in a close enough town. The house had already been pre-installed with motion lights outside. One night, while I was in the kitchen, I saw that the backyard sensors had gone up. Figuring it was a cat or some other small critter, I went to check it out. I opened the back door and looked out. What I saw made the glass of water slip from my hand and clatter onto the floor. All I could do was stand there, the inner parts of my throat seizing up and choking me, the sharp, mangy smell finding my nostrils again. Trauma always finds a way to come home. The hound sat in my backyard, back once again to take another piece out of me. Its mouth is open in a teeth-baring growl, never to make a sound. "I'm not finished. It's large, lifeless," I said. "We aren't done yet." The scars on my leg burned, and were marked forever and always. I closed the door, locked it, and walked upstairs to my bedroom. There was not much else I could do. For half a moment, I actually thought about calling animal control and telling them a rabid dog was loose in my yard. But the beast would be gone by then. It was always gone by then. The hound has come several times since then, bounding at me from a dark alley, leaping out from behind a tree. A shadow is forever hunting me, and just how long will it take until it bursts out of my closet gunning for my neck? I've since bought a pistol, and the loaded chamber never leaves my side. Who knows if it will even do anything to that thing? But I'll die before it ever manages to catch me off guard again. Sometimes I even think about going back to Tally, where I know more kids are surely playing around those woods, exploring places, running into things they shouldn't. "Are you sure you have all the rules memorized?" my boss said as he gathered his belongings to go home. "Yeah, sure thing. I got them all up here," I said as I pointed to my head. He gave me a nod and headed out the door of the small office to go. My boss was a little off, to say the least. This was my first month as a security guard at a cemetery right around the corner from my residence, and I had just gotten out of college about 3 months ago. This reason, all of the unexplained has been boring, checking cameras and doing rounds through the cemetery, making sure nothing is out of order. Right. I needed a source of income, and this was the best paying job I could find. No real experience is needed, the flyer said. My take was that they were desperate to find someone fast, so I took advantage of that. I was hired the day that I found the flyer over the phone. I never even found out the guy's name. Once I came in on my first day, my boss gave me no training, no do's and don'ts, just a verbal list of 9 rules I had to follow and memorize before Halloween night. "These rules are to be followed only on Halloween night," he said. He said stress. "You must follow these rules in the exact way they are told to you. If you mess up even a small part, well, you won't mess up, because I trust you to follow them word for word." I looked at him, confused because this sounded almost like a threat. Nevertheless, I pulled out my phone and started an audio recording so he could record the list. Once he finished telling me the rules, I was in absolute disbelief. This guy is insane. No wonder no one wants to work here. This guy is actually insane. I thought to myself, I know every place has certain rules to follow, but to designate a set of insane rules for Halloween night only, I guess you won't know how I felt until I tell you the rules that he gave me, word for word, exactly as he told me, straight from the recording. On Halloween night, please arrive at 8:30 p.m., no earlier, no later. Do not walk in these doors until it reaches at 30. For the love of God, please. Stay inside the office until 9:15. Do not leave. Keep yourself occupied, but do not check the security cameras during this time. I'll make sure to turn them off before you get there, so there is no temptation to peek at them. This might be one of the most important rules. If the monitor turns on by itself, do not look either. If for some reason you look and see it has revealed the A section of the cemetery, you must turn off the lights in the office and hide. If it reveals the B or C section and you look at it, your only option is to run. Good luck with this. To make this easier, just cover the monitor with a jacket or blanket, because you will not want to see what happens out here this time on Halloween night. Rule number 3. After 9:15 strikes, you will have 30 seconds to get out of the office. Leave the door unlocked. It is possible you will pass an unnaturally tall figure with no facial features. This is not a Halloween costume, and you must tell him good evening and look him right where his eyes would be. If he doesn't respond, continue on your way to patrol the cemetery. If he says anything at all, you must stand completely still. Do not move a muscle. He might walk around you, but if you keep still until he's done, he should walk away with no problem. Go into the office, and he will slam the door behind him. Rule number 4. You will make your way to Section A once. You inspect Section A, you will realize the gravestone titled James R. Hackney is being dug up completely. This is not out of the ordinary. Do not, and I mean do not pay any attention to what is inside the 6-foot hole in the ground. You will not see the rest of your shift if you look down into that hole. Just keep walking to Section B and do not look back. Rule number 5. As soon as you cross the bridge from Sections A to B, you will notice about a dozen shadow-like figures standing around in a circle around the big oak tree to the left of the bridge. Please listen closely to what I'm about to say. You must find the figure wearing the black top hat. You will walk up behind him and ask, "Am I clear?" If you hear a voice from inside your head say continue, then you can carry on to Section B. If you don't hear anything, you must wait. You can look over to the section at this time, but I recommend keeping your eyes down. Trust me. There will be no physical harm to you if you look, but I cannot promise you will be emotionally intact after looking. Rule number 6. Once you get the go-ahead, continue on to Section B. You may walk around and do what you would normally do every night here. The only catch is that you must stay in this section until 10:0. It should be 9:45 by now, so you won't have to wait long. After the time crosses 10:0, continue on. Rule number 7. After walking out of Section B, you will notice a strange temperature change and a lighting change. The time will have jumped to 2 a.m. after crossing. Do not panic, and please do not answer your phone. Your phone will be ringing constantly. As soon as it starts ringing, you will stand still and not move until it stops. It will be calls from your mother, father, siblings, girlfriend, boyfriend, or anyone you can think of. You must not answer these calls. It is not actually them calling. It is in fact the man that you saw earlier, the one with no facial features. He is trying to lure you back to the office. You must stay away from that office until I tell you to go back. Your phone will stop ringing after about a half hour, which leaves you at around 2:30 a.m. You can continue on at this point. Rule number 8. You will notice another time jump, this time 2 more hours from 2:30. If the time still says 2:30 after the calls stop, you are in trouble. Unfortunately, there is nothing you can do here. You messed up a step at some point if you ended up here. You can finally finish your inspection of Section C. You must be prepared for a woman covered in blood to run up to you, begging for help. She will be asking you where her baby is And if you can come fast to help her, do not be startled no matter how loud she yells. Tell her you will meet her outside the cemetery in 10 minutes and ask her to wait there. She will run off in the opposite direction, and that's how you know you succeeded. There will be a lot of towels and rags all over the ground covered in blood around Section C. This is the only maintenance you will have to do. Just pick them up and dispose of them in the waste bin closest to you. Rule number 9. After completing this final task, you must run back to your office. Do not look anywhere, but ahead of you, you will see figures everywhere. And you will hear your name being called from voices that you think you recognize. Just keep running. Once you reach the office, you will see the faceless man leaving the building. It should be 5 a.m. at this point. He will stop you and either say good work or nod at you, and you will slowly walk into the office and close the door. For the remainder of the shift, you can check the cameras, sit down, and go on with your shift until I come inside to start my shift. Siri would say, "Come with me." If he says, "Come with me," you will run and lock yourself in the office. Do not fall for his calm, monotone voice. He is anything but calm if you mess up. Do not let him in, and wait for him to stop banging on the door. Once this stops, cover your eyes for the last hour of your shift. Don't look around until you hear 3 knocks on the door. This will be my time to relieve you of your shift. Advertisements. You won't be called in for a few weeks to come to terms with what you have seen, and you will be paid a handsome amount of money for your duties. Now that you have listened to the rules as well, I hope you can understand my initial suspicion and why I was so baffled. I thought this was a joke until I finished my shift. After I arrived at 8:30, my boss left, and I decided I was going to just follow the rules given to me, humble him, and be a good sport about the prank. I didn't check the cameras, and I headed out the door. After going outside, the brisk fall air hit me as I saw a tall man walking up to me. I looked at him, and he was actually faceless. It looked so real, and it kinda gave me the creeps. I almost forgot to tell him good evening. He looked at me. Well, I think he did, and continued on through the door. I shivered a little as I headed straight to Section A. I arrived at the entrance, and I searched for James R. Hockney's grave. A grave I always saw, as it was the biggest one there. To my disbelief, it was actually being dug up. I felt sick to my stomach that they would go this far to scare me. So I hurried past the grave as a wave of uneasiness came over me. This can't be real, I reassured myself as I headed across the bridge to Section B. I scanned for the oak tree, and when I finally found it, I noticed the figures my boss warned me about. I instantly spotted the one with the top hat. I unsteadily scurried over to him and asked, "Am I clear?" No answer. As I stood there, waiting for an answer that never came, I decided to look away from the man and peek over to Section B, because surely the pranksters wanted me to look since they warned me against it. I froze and felt pins and needles in my hands as I saw myself standing there in the distance. At least what looked like me, except I was taller and covered in blood. As the figure that presumably was me stared back, it let out a screech and started running towards me. I was startled and absolutely mortified by this, and I turned around to run. I looked back, and as it reached its arms out, it completely vanished. As soon as it vanished, I heard a voice from within my head say, "Continue." At this point, I had a million thoughts running through my head as I started to realize whatever was happening was somehow impossibly real, and I felt my mind switch from confused to defensive. I inspected the area until 10 p.m., constantly looking over my shoulder. I checked my phone and saw it was time to move to Section 3. I felt exactly what I was told. A temperature change, and saw the surroundings get just a little bit darker. It was noticeably colder. No way, I told myself as I reached for my phone, which displayed 2:00 a.m. Before I could form another thought, my phone rang right on cue and stopped dead in my tracks. Dad. I stared back at the phone as I looked at those 3 letters. I never knew my dad, and I definitely never had him saved in my phone. I felt a tear form in my eye, because this was a very sensitive topic for me. I let it ring as I got lost in a trance of thinking about how, on Earth, any of this was even possible. The ringing finally stopped, and I let out a sigh of relief. I remembered the next rule about the time and opened my phone again. I kept moving on with some stray tears in my eyes. Watching my phone turn from this was a relief to me, because now that I knew this was somehow real, I realized I have taken all the steps right to this point so far. As I started inspecting Section 3 with cold fingers and numb toes, I heard screaming. Naturally, this scared the hell out of me, and I jumped out of my shoes. I snapped my head around to a blood-covered woman screaming, "My baby." "Can't find my baby," I told her, and after a bit of hesitation, I told her to meet me at the entrance of the cemetery in 10 minutes. She nodded and ran off, and I noticed a ton of blood-covered rags all over the ground. Shaken up by her screams, I slowly picked up the rags and threw them out. I looked around and ran back to the office. The whole run I didn't see anyone and didn't hear anything, which was weird because my boss said otherwise. I'll count my blessings here though, and finally find myself in front of the office. The man was leaving. This time I looked at him in complete terror as he turned my way and said, "Come with me." I wasted no time running past him, into the office, and slamming the door behind me. What did I mess up? I yelled over the sound of banging on the door as I pulled a jacket over my head. I shivered in fear for the entire hour until I heard 3 knocks on the door. I shot up, threw the door open to reveal my boss, and yelled, "What the hell did you just put me through?" I was mad, although relieved to see him, who looked a lot more colorful and lifelike than he has in the past. He looked at me and smiled at me. "Go home, kid. Get some sleep," I yelled back. "No, I want answers. You cannot just tell me to go after the night I just had." He looked at me and said, "You took care of my cemetery, kid. I thank you for that." He held out his hand for a handshake. "My name is James Randall Hackney, and I've been dead for 200 years. Every Halloween, I leave the cemetery. Recharge, so my physical body does not perish. You covered me last night, and I thank you for that." It didn't take me long to recognize his name as the same on the gravestone that was dug up. I stared back at him, mouth wide open, speechless. I walked out of that door, packed my house up, and never came back to this town again.